What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. The Pokemon games changed forever in Gen 3 when they introduced abilities, providing additional inherent attributes to each Pokemon out there, making them far more diverse. However, just because some abilities are different in name doesn't mean they're actually unique characteristics, so let's take a look at all the abilities that are actually the same. Now, just before we start, this is according to the game mechanics and not my own judgment, so if two abilities share similar setups of if A then B, they are counted as the same even if the variables are different. So let's just begin with the ability that every Grass-type starter receives with Overgrow. This ability powers up Grass-type moves by 50%, but only once your health has fallen to 1/3 or lower. All things considered, it's pretty middle of the road. It likely won't come into play all that often, but could still come in handy in a pinch. So your Grass-type starter can at least get a Second Wind. Hey, Second Wind would be a pretty cool ability name. Anyway, if Overgrow seems similar, that's because the same thing happens with the ability Blaze that all of the Fire-type starters have. Obviously this works for fire attacks instead, but mimics the same numbers. And we see this once again in Torrent, which is the ability that all of the Water-type starters are given as well. But this opening trifecta is not all with this setup, because there's also the ability Swarm, which boosts Bug-type moves at low health. The biggest difference here is that this ability is a lot more widespread than just one per generation, but truthfully, I'm kind of surprised they don't have one of these for every type out there. But there are different abilities that interact with types, such as Normalize. This is the signature ability of the Skitty line that turns any and all moves into the normal type. Now, this does boost the power by 20%, but it also means that you'll never stand up to a ghost type again. However, I have made use of it before, so it's not a complete detriment. Other abilities do the inverse, such as Aerialate, which turns normal moves into other types, in this case specifically flying, and boosts them by 20%. This might have been reserved for just Mega Evolutions, but the premise was seen again with Pixelate, which changes normal to Fairy, and Refrigerate, which changes them to Ice type. And even though most of these disappeared, we saw the last ability of this kind in Alola with Galvanize, which does the same thing but changes them to electric type attacks, so it won't really help against ground Pokemon, but still packs a punch like the rest. And as good as those are, some abilities allow changes to all types, such as Protean, not Protein, Protean, which allows Greninja to change into any of the types that it just used in the last move. This means a big headache for anyone that's facing this ability, since their opponent can be any type there is. And this does actually have an exact copy in Libero that is the hidden ability of the Cinderace line. But those aren't the only type-changing abilities, because there's also Multi-type, which is found on Arceus. This time the change occurs with a hold item, whether that be one of the plates or even Z-crystals. Arceus can shift into something besides normal. This is the same as the ability RKS system found on Silvally that can be changed by the memory hold items. But they are color-coded, so it does make it easier to figure out what type you'll be facing. However, some abilities react defensively to certain types, such as Justified. This raises a Pokemon's attack stat when they're hit with a Dark-type move. This is useful, but most Pokemon that get this are fighting, so I'm not sure how often it'll be used against you. There's also Rattled, which scares the Pokemon and raises their speed when hit with either a Bug, Dark, or Ghost-type move, or even Intimidated. So basically this gives you all the weaknesses of the Psychic type, but none of the strengths. But it does ensure that you'll be able to make a hasty retreat. There's also Water Compaction, which, as it sounds, raises the Pokemon's defense 2 stages when hit with a water move. It doesn't provide an immunity, but does greatly benefit the Sand in their weakness. Likewise, there is Steam Engine. When hit with either a fire or water move, the Pokemon's speed will be raised a whopping 6 stages. So even though these abilities are varied in results, they are counted as the same given their criteria. The ability Motor Drive does create an immunity to electric attacks, and then raises the Pokemon's speed. And this is duplicated in the far more common Sap Sipper, which provides a grass immunity and boosts physical attack. I might have gone with special, but still. Lightning Rod is similar to Motor Drive, instead boosting one's special attack. However, it is different because it draws in all of the electric type moves on the field, essentially meaning that any electric attack is your gain. And this is true of the ability Storm Drain that behaves the same way by drawing in all the water attacks instead. Fairy Aura is an ability that boosts the power of Fairy-type moves on the battlefield by an extra third, and just like it is the ability Dark Aura, which predictably boosts Dark-type instead. However, both get nullified by Aura Break. And then there's the ever-useful Thick Fat ability that gives a resistance to both Ice and Fire-type moves, providing plenty of insulation. This is considered the same as the ability Heatproof, even though this only works with the fire, it is the same 50% boost against it. There's also Volt Absorb, which, as you know, converts electric attacks into restorative HP, which is the bane of rockers everywhere. Just like it is the ability Water Absorb, which obviously does the same with good old H2O. However, this is not the only time, since we do see Dry Skin does the exact same thing with water moves. What makes Dry Skin unique is that it shares other characteristics with different abilities, namely the fact that in sunlight it will lose HP, which is part of the ability Solar Power. At least Solar Power gives you the added bonus of raising special attack by 50%, so the chipping health trade-off is up to you. But while we're talking about weather, we might as well bring up the weather summoning abilities, starting with Drizzle, allowing you to bring the rain for 5 turns as soon as you switch in. This is copied in the other weather conditions of Sunlight with Drought, can be done with Sandstorms with the ability Sandstream, and even with Hail using the ability Snow Warning. There's also Sand Spit that causes sandstorms, but this is only done after being hit instead of entering battle. Of course, with that, there are many other abilities that interact with weather, like Dry Skin that also replenishes health in the rain, on top of other things, which is like the ability Rain Dish, which lets you gain back 1/16 of your health in the rain. And Ice Body does the same thing with a hailstorm somehow, but it does work. But HP isn't the only thing affected by weather. Sandville raises evasion when the Pokemon is in a sandstorm, and Snowcloak does the same thing in hail. It makes sense that these would work in the conditions with excess particles flying around. There are also speed-enhancing weather abilities like Chlorophyll, which increases speed during sunlight. Then there's also Swift Swim that reacts this same way in the rain condition, Sand Rush that makes you speedy in a sandstorm, and even the more recent Slush Rush that works in hail. So there are speed-enhancing abilities for each of the weather conditions. But if you don't want anyone to get any of these buffs, there's always Cloud 9, which completely removes all weather once you enter the battle. This can be pretty handy, but is the exact same as Rayquaza's ability Airlock, that lets it have an advantage over the other Hoenn legends. But speaking of, the primal forms have Primordial Sea, which is a beefed-up rain that eliminates fire attacks before they can happen. Even better is Desolate Land that creates super harsh sunlight that evaporates all water-type moves so that Groudon doesn't die immediately. And of course, Mega Rayquaza has Delta Stream, which whips up a bunch of winds that purge other weather and also makes it so the flying type loses its weaknesses. But some abilities simply interact with a Pokemon's moves. Take a look at the new Regis with Transistor, which powers up any electric-type moves by 50%, and Dragon's Maw, which does the same for dragon attacks. This happens with the Steelworker ability, but obviously with steel moves instead. Now this might sound identical to the Steely Spirit ability since it does also boost steel-type attacks, but this one will also apply to any ally Pokemon on the field. Others are more specific, like Reckless, which enhances the power of recoil moves by 20%. Now, this makes these powerful moves even scarier, but it also means more of your own health is gone, so beware. The ability Iron Fist works the same power-wise, but with punching moves. Just about any punch move you could think of, and even some more, are buffed on a lot of fighting types out there. There's also Strong Jaw, which raises the power of biting moves by 50%. It's pretty niche, but these are great attacks even before the boost. And of course there's Tough Claws, which powers up all physical contact moves by 30%, reserved only for super tough Pokemon. Mega Launcher famously boosts Aura and Pulse moves by 50% as well, which might be the most narrow field so far, but we also see things such as Neuroforce, which boosts all super effective attacks. This being piled on top of everything else Ultra Necrozma brings to the table. But adaptability is far more common, and instead relies on the Pokemon's same type attack bonus, so that moves that ordinarily get an extra 50% get a 100%. And then at the opposite end is Tinted Lens, which basically negates not effective moves and makes them neutral on all targets that normally wouldn't care. These might not seem close enough, but once again the game does consider them offshoots since they all boost moves in some way. Another common branch of these is Technician, a great ability that increases every single attack that has 60 base power or less, which means that it can make them up to 120 power, so be sure to give it a try. And of course there's the newer Punk Rock that increases the power of sound-based attacks from this Pokémon. However, this ability also has the added bonus of resisting sound attacks used against it, which brings us to the similar ability Soundproof that offers complete immunity to any sound-based attacks. There are of course other abilities that offer specific resistances, perhaps the most famous one being Wonder Guard, which allows Shedinja to ignore anything besides super effective hits. Other than that, there's Levitate, which of course makes the Pokémon unable to be hit by ground-type attacks, and also the more concentrated Bulletproof, that makes the Pokémon impervious to ball and bomb style moves. So after these, there's also Arena Trap that prevents Pokémon from escaping battle, unless they're a flying type or have Levitate, because this is specific to ground types, but this trick is seen again in Magnet Pull, this time only working on steel types. And of course there is the ever-annoying Shadow Tag that prevents any regular switch-outs, except for ghosts who cannot be trapped. But another interesting group of abilities are the ones revolving around status conditions. Starting with Effect Spore, this ability has a 10% chance to cause sleep, poison, or paralysis when a foe makes direct contact. Being able to spread 3 different conditions is pretty great for these mushrooms. But there are other ones that simply specialize in one status, namely Static, which has a 30% chance to cause paralysis on direct contact, and the same holds true for Poison Point with poisoning, and Flame Body for burning the opponent. Interestingly, this also holds true for Cute Charm, except this one works with Infatuation, making the foe occasionally immobilized by love. However, there's also the inverse, with abilities that give you a boost when under a status condition, like Guts. This ability grants the Pokémon a 50% buff to attack when afflicted with any status condition, except for freezing, but you can't move then anyway. This is copied in Marvel Scale, which instead will raise a Pokémon's defense, and also the ability Quick Feet, which increases speed even when paralyzed. There are also more specific variants of Toxic Boost and Flare Boost that are signature abilities that only respond to Poison and Burn respectively. However, if you wish to undo a status condition, you might be better off with the ability Natural Cure, which will rid the Pokémon of any statuses when they are switched out of battle. And like it is the ability Regenerator that also heals upon switching out, this time returning a third of your total health, which is pretty outstanding. There's also Serene Grace, which causes the chance for additional effects to double. Not just for statuses, but also for stat drops and flinching, for example, but the game also considers the ability Super Luck as the same, even if this only applies to critical hits. But there are also plenty of abilities that prevent statuses at all, like Immunity, which, despite the name, is specifically applied to poison. Limber, which prevents paralysis, Insomnia that prevents falling asleep, which is the same as Vital Spirit, Water Veil prevents burns, and Magma Armor prevents freezing. However, that's not all, because there are also abilities like Inner Focus, which prevents flinching, Own Tempo that prevents confusion, and Oblivious, which stops infatuation, taunts, and actually all 3 of these last abilities also block Intimidate. There's also Pastel Veil that blocks poisoning, but the difference here is that it protects the Pokémon as well as any allies that are on the field. This holds true for Sweet Veil that blocks sleeping, as well as Flower Veil that prevents stat lowering and non-volatile statuses, and Aroma Veil which negates any move restrictions such as Taunt, Encore, or Disable. Not the same, but close enough, as Magic Guard. This ability prevents damage from status conditions, but also damage from weather, recoil, pretty much anything outside of a direct attack. Another damage avoidance ability is Rock Head, which makes it so that you won't suffer from recoil. This is kind of the opposite of Reckless. It doesn't provide a boost, but you also won't hurt yourself. Other prevention abilities include Clear Body that stop any of your stats from being lowered, and this is replicated by White Smoke, which is found on fire types, and even Full Metal Body. Several legendary abilities are bad about just copying others, but there's also the narrowed down versions of this, like Hyper Cutter, that only prevents lowering of attack, Keen Eye, which leaves accuracy untouched, and the oddly named Big Pecs, which prevents lowering of defense. However, there is another option. When hit with a stat drop, Defiant will sharply raise a Pokemon's attack, so even an attack drop turns into a net gain. And there's also Competitive, which does the same for special attack, so these are great tools to punish those strategies. But occasionally, these buffs are constant, like with Huge Power, which simply doubles the Pokemon's attack all the time. And this is fully copied in the ability Pure Power, so I'm not even sure why they made it different. The variant Fur Coat does this for defense, making all physical contact half of what it used to be, and even the new Ice Scales does this with special defense, which is quite useful for the fragile Frostmoth. The ability Intrepid Sword raises attack when switching into battle, while the inverse is provided in Dauntless Shield that raises defense. So good for the Galar mascots, I guess. Other times, stat boosts require some effort, like with Moxie, where knocking out a Pokemon will raise your attack, making the next KO even easier. This happens again with Chilling Neigh, while Grim Neigh buffs the special attack instead. But of course, Beast Boost takes this to the extreme by raising whichever stat of the user is highest, making the Ultra Beasts extra scary. On the other hand, there are similar abilities that lower stats, like Gooey that lowers the opponent's speed when they make direct physical contact. This makes sense, but the exact same thing happens with Tangling Hair as well. I know that they're both unique origins, but maybe something a little more generic could cover both. However, some stat-altering abilities come with form changes like Zen Mode, which shifts Darmanitan into a different strategy when below half health. This health gimmick also changes Minior with shields down, letting it shift from tanky to speedy and more powerful. This happens in ludicrous levels when Zygarde has the Power Construct ability that changes it to 100% mode, giving it far more strength than it already had as a legendary Pokemon. However, these are not the only abilities to work at 50% health, with Wimp Out causing Wimpod to switch out or flee, and for some reason the exact same ability was given a different name on its evolution. Come on guys, you're just clogging it up now. Then there's the Filter ability, which has the brilliant feature of reducing super effective hits by 25%, and this fantastic characteristic is found again in the Solid Rock ability, and also for Prism Armor. But if you can't swing that, maybe you'll settle for Multiscale that reduces damage taken when at full HP. It's not great for long-term use, but the same thing happens with the Shadow Shield ability on Lunala. Even more reduced is Battle Armor, which simply prevents all critical hits and is copied with the very little effort Shell Armor. However, if you have the Mold Breaker ability, most of what we just said doesn't really matter, because Mold Breaker overrides most other abilities, nullifying their effects. This was copied in Gen 5 by both Turbo Blaze and Terravolt to bypass any abilities for the Dragon mascots. A more specific version of this comes with Propeller Tail that ignores target alterations, meaning that Storm Drain or Lightning Rod will not draw in the attack, and this even works for moves that cause this, like ignoring Follow Me, but the ability was done again in the same game under the name Stalwart. Now they get kind of weird, like Receiver, that is only there to be a placeholder until your ally dies, at which time you will co-opt their ability. And this is actually copied in the ability called Power of Alchemy as well, just in case you wanted your ability to be a surprise, I guess. There's the ever-popular Rough Skin that damages a foe when they make direct physical contact, and there's no special equivalent of this yet, but we do see it again in Iron Barbs that functions the same way. There's Electric Surge that summons electric terrain on the battlefield, and of course this works with the other terrains and their respective abilities. Another commonly used ability is Prankster, that gives priority to non-attacking moves, so it can be a great thing to counter other priority moves, but this is not the only ability based on that, like Gale Wings that prioritizes flying-type attacks, and then Triage, which specifically enhances healing moves. However, if you wanted to stop any of those, why not try Dazzling, which is an ability that negates all priority moves? Or perhaps Queenly Majesty, which blocks any priority moves on the entire field, requiring a change in strategy. The Pickpocket ability will steal the foe's hold item when they touch you with an attack. However, the opposite happens with the Magician ability that only activates when you touch them. There are also weight-altering abilities. Heavy Metal makes the Pokemon twice as heavy, while Light Metal makes them half their usual weight. I'm not sure why only steel types get this tactic, but it does keep people on their toes. And lastly, maybe the most peculiar function for any ability is found with plus and minus. They boost special attack by 50%, but only if there is another Pokemon with a plus or minus ability in the battle. And what's even more strange is there are multiple moves that work only with these abilities. So that's it for abilities with the same properties, in battle anyway. A couple of them share outside of battle effects, like how Flame Body, Magma Armor, and now Steam Engine all reduce the time it takes to hatch an egg. There are also many abilities that increase the likelihood of wild encounters in various ways, like Lightning Rod and Storm Drain making electric and water types more common. The same holds true for Static and Magnet Pull, but for steel types this time. Harvest works for grass types, and Flash Fire for the fire type. But types aren't all. You can use Synchronize to find wild Pokemon with the same nature as yours, Cute Charm can call up the opposite gender, and I didn't even know this, but apparently Compound Eyes can increase the likelihood of a wild Pokemon with hold items. Intimidate and Keen Eye can decrease the chance of finding lower level Pokemon, while Pressure, Hustle, and Vital Spirit will make it so that higher level Pokemon will appear. So that's how it's different from Insomnia. There are also many more abilities that will change the overall likelihood of wild encounters, whether up or down, that you might not have even realized. And according to the game, the pickup ability for gathering items has a counterpart in Honey Gather. But come on, let's not pretend that only collecting honey is anywhere near the same usefulness. But that is every Pokemon ability that shares its effects with another. What are your favorite copied abilities? Let me know down in the comments. Also be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And we'll see you around next time!